Investigators saying the shooting happened after the officer was placed in a dangerous situation. Aurora police admitting many in the community have questions about the shooting.
A traffic stop took less than 3 minutes to turn into a morgue tag.
Just like you got to teach an officer to be quick on a draw, you've also got to teach him how to holster quickly.
And so if you're trained to handle chaos, you shouldn't have to let the scene spiral into a kill shot.
Press conferences are for dummies anyway, because you really can't get a whole lot done there.
He basically began redefining what de-escalation was. And this was just to protect his department.
You got to disengage until you get help there.
Hill of Justice is sponsored and produced by Jermaine Delmas Studios.
In Aurora, Colorado, a traffic stop took less than 3 minutes to turn into a morgue tag. The official story, he was aggressive. He moved toward a gun that he tossed. But here's the truth. It's messier than that. And it shows how police tactics can mean the difference between life and death. Aurora police are asking us to take their word for it. And history tells us their word doesn't mean anything. And still doesn't mean anything today. Welcome to the Hill of Justice. I'm Jerome Hill. That's retired Sheriff Victor Hill. And we're your hosts. So here's the problem that we have. At 7 o'clock on Saturday, last Saturday, an Aurora officer tries to pull over Belt Stubblefield. He flees police, he crashes into a car, and actually 2 cars. He gets out of his car after being ordered to stay in the vehicle, and he throws a handgun into the grass. Witnesses say that they heard him say something to the effect, "Get that shit, get that shit." He walks towards the gun, and the officer alone claims he tried to de-escalate. And that's where all this stuff happens. So this is an exercise in complete failure, training failure. That it's the reason why they have a consent decree right now in Aurora, Colorado. Just for context, let's take a look at the video.
Oh my God!
Oh no!
Oh, he just fucking killed him!
He just killed him!
All right, let me tell you what I see here. I see a training issue, and I see a training issue that I don't know if it's really taught as much as it should be. Just like you got to teach an officer to be quick on a draw, you've also got to teach him how to holster quickly. I know it sounds strange, but you have to, because sometimes you escalate to drawing your weapon, and then you realize, okay, this is a situation that doesn't call for a weapon now. So now I've got to holster. You know, you can't arrest a person with a gun in your hand. We've seen it happen, but they're lucky if that happens, because at that point you're in a predicament where you're struggling over your gun. So if you're in a situation where this person doesn't have a weapon, or he's not doing anything to go to that particular level, at that point you've got to be able to holster. There's no such thing as, okay, now that my weapon is up, I can't put it back. So you got to put it back and now go hands on, or perhaps go to another something on your tool belt, be it a taser or whatever like that. You know, part of the reason
Which he did try to do. He tried to
Okay.
go for his baton. That's what he said he tried to do. He tried to grab for his baton, but
And
he couldn't do
what
it, so he
happened?
kept the gun up.
Right, he couldn't do it because the gun was still in his hand. Correct.
Mhm.
Right.
Basically,
So
but how the police chief Chamberlain tried to explain it away was that he has the gun out, and because the actions of the suspect, he wasn't able to holster and get the other use of force weapon out.
You got to be able to train a holster
Whatever.
just as well as you train to
Right.
clear leather rather, so you can do what needs to be done. Let me tell you what a police chief.
It didn't have to come out in the first place, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, maybe in the beginning, if a guy gets out with a gun and he tosses it, I could see him clearing leather in the beginning. But once he didn't need it anymore, okay, now I need both hands, or I got to do something else. So let me reholster and go to something else. A lot of people, once they get that weapon out, they act like they don't know how to put it back
It's
up.
a
And
safety
sometimes you have to
blanket.
be able to do it right. So, exactly. So, part of de-escalating is sometimes going to a lower use of force. Let me tell you, and you talk about the police chief, and it's interesting, because let me tell you when he's in error as a former head of a law enforcement agency, I don't talk about shootings. Okay, let me tell you why. When you see press conferences, and you and I know, I always feel press conferences are for dummies anyway, because you really can't get a whole lot done there. First of all, you have a press conference, you don't even have most of the information yet. Okay, you only know what the officer said, what the video is. There's a whole lot that have to be investigated. So if you get up there and you immediately clear the officer, and then something comes out and it shows that it was an execution, you're looking crazy. Or better yet, if you get out there and you condemn this officer and something comes up showing that it's a justifiable shooting, you've already condemned him. What I've always recommended to law enforcement executives is, first of all, it shouldn't be your agency doing an investigation anyway. Like in Georgia, we have the GBI. There's usually a state agency, or you should get an independent agency to come in, and not your best friend's agency, but an agency to come in independent. And the only thing that you should say, and you should really say it on a press statement as opposed to getting up and answering a bunch of questions that you don't have the answer to, is that this investigation has been turned over to whoever, and they're in the process of investigating it. So any questions you have about this investigation needs to go to them when their investigation is complete. But when you get up there, you start speculating and you start putting in conjecture, you're talking about some stuff you don't know. And I see a lot of police chiefs and law enforcement leaders get up there, and a lot of times, we don't know that yet. We don't know that. Of course you don't know it. It just happened. Then there's other questions. Well, I can't answer that right now. Well, we can't answer it. So if there's stuff you don't know and stuff you can't answer, why are you having a press conference? And we could do a whole show on press conferences, like having a bunch of dummies stand around you looking silly. They're not talking what they're standing there for. So those are the two mistakes I see a lot going on. Getting up and talking about something you haven't totally investigated, and the fact that this officer, if it's going to be any type, there can be a de-escalation in force where, okay, I'm at this level, but we no longer need to be at this level, so let's go to another level. And those are the two things I see off the rip.
The one thing that boils me is that this officer backs up into an open 6-lane highway, and he is in a position of extreme weakness and vulnerability.
I agree.
The officer is now facing a threat from the front. That's the suspect. And then multiple lethal threats on his side and back, which are cars. He put himself in a corner, a coffin corner. That's what he did. And because how terribly he was at this tactic, he used that as the impetus to go ahead and shoot. And then on top of that, you heard 3 shots, right?
I did.
At close range. What do we know about weapons? That is a distance weapon. That is not a weapon for close range. So guess what he does? Pow, pow. He's already struck him. He wasn't advancing any further. Stop. He doesn't do that.
Yeah. I can see where you're coming from there. Again, there's another technique that a lot of officers don't know, and maybe a lot of it comes from ego. But there's a technique called, people always talk about de-escalate. A lot of people don't understand a technique called disengage. And I think a lot of officers, they think once they're engaged, they got to keep engaging. Sometimes you got to disengage until you get help there. So if the person's not an immediate threat, they might be doing whatever, but you can disengage because if they're not a threat to others or not a threat to themselves immediately, there's no reason that you got to move in right then and there and do something. Really, no arrest should be made alone. If you really follow the safety rules, an arrest should be made with 2 or more officers. It is virtually impossible, no matter how big and strong you are, to get someone's hands behind their back in the handcuffs. Some of the worst people to try to arrest is a 90-pound female. So,
The
in order,
worst.
exactly. So, and you're thinking, okay, it's just an act. So, unless you knock them out or choke them out, it's going to be almost impossible to get their hands behind their back. So a lot of times it's a matter of patience, waiting for the backup to get there, a matter of disengaging until the backup gets there. But we've seen a lot of officers engage and keep engaging up to the point to where they lose their lives. And we've seen that happen right here in Georgia. But there was opportunities there to disengage until backup get there. Opportunities to say, hey, I need y'all to step it up here,
Correct. And then one of the other things that I saw too, that one of the comments that was made was especially by the police chief Chamberlain, was to explain that he raised his fist. Raising a fist isn't a death sentence. You don't have to shoot people for posturing. There's a lot of people that posture out there that they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and say all types of stuff. You know, who cares about
Yeah,
that?
one
You know,
thing's missing from law enforcement, and people probably don't know how to take that. Is I don't know if they produce officers anymore, which we used to call fisticuffs. There's not a lot of officers out there that can scrap anymore. So they feel forced to go straight to the taser, straight to the gun. I think most of them have been trained not to even do that. Officers that are very comfortable with hand to hand are not
correct.
really worried about drawing their guns. And I know back in the day, it was nothing to see officers and suspects fighting, and neither one of them was thinking about the gun. The officer wasn't thinking about drawing the gun and killing the suspect, and the suspect wasn't thinking about taking his gun. It was just whoever prevailed, because times are different now. And a
Right.
lot of reason times are different now is because of just sheer fear. And I don't know. I don't think we produce those type of cops anymore. That they, unless they're highly skilled or whatever, they don't feel comfortable engaging. Now, of course, the training scares them too, because people, well, you don't want to engage because if you engage, you have weapons on you or whatever like that. But I think cops that have that type of skill, they're not so much worried about that. They don't feel like, oh my God, I need a taser. Oh my God, I need to go straight to the weapon. Now, let me say in all fairness, there are situations where you can shoot an unarmed suspect because some of them are so strong, some of them are getting the best of the officer and can literally take their lives. Some may be skilled in martial arts. Some of them may just be super strong and super big and body slamming the officer and pounding the officer. And the only way for him to get this guy off of him is to get the deadly force.
But how
So
would you know unless you engage?
you don't know unless you engage, correct?
Right.
Now, this officer appeared to
But
have
that's the
size
default.
and strength over this guy.
Right.
But
And
but
this is the
but then
problem.
again, that's hard to say because he could have size and strength, and then he could be someone like you, and where size and strength really doesn't matter unless you really know what you're doing. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Yeah, my position is, we talk about suspects being under the influence. Well, guess what? Police officers can be under the influence too.
under the
And they
influence of
are
stupidity is what you're talking about,
stupidity,
right?
fear,
Yeah.
and bias. You know what I mean? And so if you're trained to handle chaos, you shouldn't have to let the scene spiral into a kill shot. And that's what happens when officers are scared and they don't want to go ahead and use their hands. Now, the police chief in his press conference obviously told this and said this matter, that you don't, as an officer, you're not there to go ahead and have people put hands on you. Let me tell you, I can't tell you how many times I would go to court and I would put on a charge that I was assaulted, and guess what the judge would say? That's your job. Well, guess what? I adopted that. Okay, that is my job. When I handle suspect, that's my job. And not all threats, and this is another point too, not all threats are created equal. There's a difference between a guy posturing, shouting at you, raising his fist, and a guy reaching out for a gun, and
I agree.
wasn't reaching out for the gun. You're
Yeah.
you're trained in all these grades, but
Oh, I
this
totally
officer
agree. And
dropped it.
and people got to understand what assault is and what battery is. Assault, you don't have to touch a person. You could jump at the person, be pointing, going into their space, and that's assault. And then battery is the actual touching, be it a punch, a push, or whatever. Once the assault occurs, the officer is authorized to use force. That doesn't mean deadly force. But I mean, as far as getting a person off of them or putting hands on them to control them, you can't just let a guy stay there in your face because you could get knocked out. As the boxers say, the old maxim, hands down, man down. So officers should be trained to keep their hands up because if you get sucker punch, the right punch and you're unconscious. So you can't allow a person to stay in your space. So once a person comes in your space or point, for safety, you need to take action. That action should match the action. I don't think it should be a gun or whatever, but you should have enough hand-to-hand skills to get that person off of you. It might even be appropriate to use a strike at that point because you got a person in your space pointing your finger, then your face, and that next point could be a hit. So at that point, if you have to use a preemptive strike, it's totally logical because he was in a position to assault you. But as far as this person coming and pointing, and then you pull your gun and go pow, 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 the force has to match. It has to be equal. Officers can go one step above, of course, in order to control the situation. But even one step above that that's not a weapon. That's not a use of force with a weapon or anything
Not all
like
the
that.
time, right?
Yeah.
Not all the time, and thus we're talking about the force continuum when we talk about these matters. So, good.
Well, you're right about that. It's a force continuum, but you got to have a little bit of
Common
uh
sense.
common sense, or should we say street sense, or whatever. I think people pretty much know if you've been on the streets long enough, you pretty much know when something's about to escalate. But like I said, it's strange because there was a time when you and I were growing up where a fight was a fight.
Mhm.
We just fought. Nobody said, okay, well, let me go get a gun and let's start shooting. And you don't know, you got to know when that's about to happen. I mean, but if there's a suspect that's just swinging on you or something like that, okay, then you're totally authorized to swing back. But to elevate to a weapon, that makes no sense at all. That's
Let's
not
go
one
back.
step above. That's like 5 steps above.
Right. So let's go back to a little bit of what you were saying earlier, and this really has to be, of course, we're talking about this individual decides to, you know, um, engage, and he was aggressive on that end of it. The officer may have just lost his spatial whereabouts about him. He was doing a good job going one step behind, and he was taking those type of steps. But as you know, we don't have a duty to retreat. And also in Colorado, guess what we have? Stand your ground state.
Yeah,
So
but remember now. Let's get back to what I was telling you. He's a police, and it's not really a matter of standing your ground. It's a matter of being smart. I mean, you pull over a car with 4 guys in it, you stand your ground. Okay, cool, you stood your ground. But common sense would be, hey guys, just wait right here 1 second while I check something, and then you wait for 4 or 5 cars to come up before you engage. I don't know how close or far his backup was, but there was a chance to, okay, I'm gonna let this guy walk around a little bit. Hey, I need y'all to step it up or whatever like that. You you can disengage.
right.
And there are times you disengage. I can remember when I was sheriff, I was walking in Quick Trip, and this guy basically had a camp in front of the door. One of the weirdest things I ever seen. And as I walked in, I was telling him, I said, hey, you can't be there. I need you to move. And his reaction was very, very violent. I can be if I want. I don't have to move. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to. I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. Stay right there. So I walked on in the store. I said, you're absolutely right. Stay right there. So I walked in the store and got me a drink and just got on the radio and said, get me a couple of units and had me a drink. And when the cars pulled up, I came back outside and I said, hey, go ahead and arrest him for whatever. And he said, you told me to stay right here. I said, yeah, I needed you to wait so they could come and arrest you. It wasn't a need to stand there and argue when I could just go have a drink and wait for the guys to come. Why get my suit dirty? Why go through all of that? It's just a matter of patience, disengaging, and then doing what you need to do. So
Right.
we've got to use that strategy. Sometimes it's disengaging, sometimes it's waiting for backup. There's no, you can wait for backup until you have the advantage. Your objective is to make an arrest, or your objective is to control the situation. And whether you control it through restraint, whether you control it through whatever, that's fine. But even if you're going to control it through restraints, it usually takes more than one person to control, to restrain somebody. Unless that person is 100% compliant, it's going to be almost impossible, even for a bodybuilder, to restrain someone unless he just overwhelms them with force and body slams them or knock him out. And the hardest person for him is going to be the container, that 90-pound weakling that just won't put their hands behind their back. You're going to need more than two people to control one person, and some people require more than that.
That's true. And so here's, the the thing to me was the distracting portion of this. Of course, the officer, or let's go ahead and say Police Chief Chamberlain, wants to characterize all of this as he de-escalated him with that strike. What did you think about that strike? Because I can see where the officer is trying to say, hey, guess what? If he was giving those type of commands to those people, they could pick up the weapon and help him. But that's not what even remotely happened.
First of all, the strike made no sense to me. You go
It,
up
it
behind the guy and
didn't.
you strike, you still got a gun in your hand. So
Right.
unless you're going to knock him out, what exactly was the strike supposed to do? And suppose he turns around. See, here's what gets interesting, and why you got to learn how to be able to holster as well as draw. If a person approaches you while that gun is in your hand, once they bridge the gap, now it's a fight for the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Because once he gets in your space, now it can turn deadly because y'all fighting over the gun. So is he going to get the gun from you and shoot you, or are you going to shoot him? So that's why it's important to know how to holster. Because if you keep that gun in your hand and you allow him to get close to you, now you're in a struggle over the weapon. Now, someone rushes you or ambushes you with the gun in your hand, and now you're fighting over it, so be it. And then you end up having to use deadly force because they're trying to take the weapon from you. But that's a situation where there was enough distance where you got to make a decision. Am I going to keep backing out in traffic, or am I going to put this holster up and go hands on? And that would have been a good time to put the weapon in the holster, say, hey, step it up. I'm in a fight, and do what needs to be done if that guy attacks you or whatever like that.
Yeah. He let the gun sit in the middle of chaos. That's all I saw. And that, he just escalated his voice commands and then eventually pulled the trigger. That's not control. And that is all panic. I mean, he was sitting there like that gun was sitting there like it was bait. And that's a failure of scene control. I don't care what anybody says. You got to secure that weapon immediately. And he could have walked that guy over to him at any point. And what about all those cars there? He could have, talking about tactically, he could have got behind the engine block. He could have done a whole bunch of stuff. But
I
he
agree.
just was sorry. I mean,
I agree.
And get this.
It's very disappointing. And then it's also, like I said, it's real disappointing for a chief to get up and, he's not even supposed to condemn it, which you can easily condemn it. It's under investigation, and once we get the findings, we're gonna do whatever needs to be done. You don't get up there and justify it. You don't get up there and condemn it. But to get up there, here's the problem with that, and we see this with law enforcement heads. We see it with judges. We see it with prosecutors. People can justify whatever they want, and then they can also unjustify whatever they want. And it should just be, what is the law? What is the procedure? But we've seen courts, justify one thing, and then in another case, it's not justified. As if it depends on who it is and do we like him? Well, we'll rule in his favor if we like him. If we don't like him, we'll rule. Well, that could be the same way. That could have been, if that was a guy that the chief didn't like, he could instantly say, hey, I don't like this, because he's someone you want to get rid of anyway. It can't be whether you like the person or not. I think Sun Tzu said probably one of the most brilliant leadership things I've ever heard. He said that good generals have to be able to punish those closest to them, but they also have to be able to reward those that they don't like. So no matter how close a person is to you, if you mess up, you get it like anybody else. And if it's a guy you don't like and he pulls a child from a burning building, you reward him and honor him. And most leaders can't do that. They can only punish those they don't like, and then they can only reward or protect those that they do like. And anytime you have a leader like that, you ultimately lose control and the respect of the people you command, because I'm sure there's people there that work there that probably don't agree with it, and they know that if they do any little infraction, they'll get their feet held to the fire. Whereas this guy basically executed somebody, and it's like, yeah, this looks good, and it doesn't look good.
Right. And so, talking about leadership, you literally cannot have leaders like Chief Chamberlain spinning failures like this as textbook procedures. You just can't
I
do that.
agree, and that's the problem in the criminal justice system. We have chiefs, we have prosecutors, we have judges, and they can spin it any way you want. If you could look at different cases and see different rulings in different circuits, almost the same circumstance, and no one knows what's right and what's wrong, and basically is who the judge is and who they like or what mood they're in, as opposed to, okay, what's the letter of the law. And we see that a lot with law enforcement leaders and everything like that. And at the end of the day, it either fits protocol or it doesn't. The law either says this or it doesn't. But to take the law and say something that you train a person to do or taught a person to do and say today is illegal, or say something like this that we train people not to do and say, nah, it's legal. That's where we get the discrepancy. That's where we get the where nobody knows what's right or wrong. It almost reminds you of a spiritual text where it says good will be bad and bad will be evil or whatever like that. And that's what we're saying,
That press conference was awful.
I'm sure it was.
He basically began redefining what de-escalation was. And this was just to protect his department,
I don't know if I've
He's-
seen a press conference that isn't terrible. I think when people get in positions, they look forward to press conferences because it's their big coming out party, for lack of a better term, no pun intended. Because, hey, I get to be on TV and I can razzle and dazzle people. And some people think they have a silver tongue and that what they say is going to go down in history and it's going to be great. And I've rarely seen it. I don't know if I've seen a great press conference. Usually they're standing there and there's a bunch of idiots behind them that still want to be on TV. So they're just standing there, some smiling, some looking silly. They're not saying anything. So I don't know what they're standing there for. If they are going to say something, come up after he's through. And then you got a person answering questions he don't know the answer to because the investigation isn't completed yet. And then you get up there and you try to explain something in a way that can't be explained or condemn something that may actually be justified. It's just not a good thing. And then no matter what you say, the reporter is going to ask a bunch of crazy questions anyway. And they're going to take just as much of the press conference to make you look crazy. So I'm never a fan of them. I think it should be press statements, but I think people love them because it gives them a chance to be on TV. The media loves them because it gives them a chance to create a circus atmosphere where they can take shots. And the public really gets informed from them. It's very little. And then people get up and they put on the show. Some start crying. Some start talking about stuff that makes no sense at all. Because, oh my God, I'm on TV. The world is watching. You're really not getting the objective. Give the basic information. Hey, on this date, on this time, we had an officer-involved shooting. It's under investigation. This is the people who investigated. In order to preserve the integrity of the investigation, there's really not a lot we can say right now. And that
Yeah.
and the people who are investigating are the ones who should be answering the question, not the guy that just got there and has surface information and he doesn't know what's going on.
Right. So, those press conferences and what he was saying actually was a dangerous mistake, or at least poor judgment on his part. While everyone else can see that the officer made a tactical mistake, and he can't or he won't acknowledge it. Add on to that, this is the fifth police chief in 5 years in Aurora. Add on to that, the officer and himself, there was red flags. He has multiple complaints and use of
How could
force.
we be so surprised? The turnover rates in Chiefs tells you something right there. And it doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the Chiefs. It probably tells you something about the leadership. There's an old saying about chiefs and sheriffs. Sheriffs run for office every 4 years. Chiefs run every city council meeting. So that tells me more about the stability of council and his bosses than it does the police chief. But that affects it. And that's why, you see chiefs do strange things where they're trying to please counsel, and they just don't have one boss to please. They've got a whole, it's almost like they're counting votes. Okay, most council members don't like each other anyway, so they've got to figure out, well, what's the majority of the council that like each other? Maybe if I please them, I can keep my job. And it makes for some strange politics, and that decides whether or not something is right or wrong or how they handle it. What's going to be interesting to see is how the prosecutors handle this. I mean, it all has to do with relationships. Like if the prosecutor and the chiefs are good buddies or whatever, or maybe whatever, then they'll go along with it and say, yeah, we don't see anything. They may take it before a grand jury, but they control what the grand jury does anyway. So they'll take it before the grand jury and tell them not to indict, and then come out and say, well, we did it, but we didn't get an indictment. It's all a big farce. But it'll be interesting to see if the DA actually agrees with that or not, because DAs is a whole nother realm of politics that's bizarre, and a lot of them, the most dangerous place to be is in between them and the camera as well.
Well, we do have one of those individuals that you saw in that video, other than the suspect and the officer. One of those individuals was his son. And his
The
son
son
was
of
there
the victim?
Of the victim.
So he watched his father get killed.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had that dynamic in that arena too. In addition to that, of course, this officer, as he was piss poor in his tactical advantage on that end of it, there's no telling how many untold individuals he could have harmed by discharging that weapon too. We can't see the angle on that, but that, I mean,
yeah, we don't know.
I don't know how you not call it an execution.
Yeah. Like I said, again, it's going to be interesting to see what's the view of the prosecutor. And like I said, again, you don't necessarily get the correct view. You get their politics. Mm-hmm. Every county's politics is different, and a lot of the politics is bizarre.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Hill of Justice. We'd like you to keep on continuing to support the channel. Please like, subscribe, and certainly give us a comment. What are some of your thoughts on the matter? And until next time, we'll talk to you then.